Over the next 4 months, you have a choice to make.
The presidential campaigns look outward as foreign policy takes center stage.
This is really not a time to be talking about the politics associated with what happened in Aurora.
And after the tragic shooting in Colorado, why the candidates won't consider tighter gun laws.
The hottest place in tiny Old Town is the Dixieland Auction House.
A look at an alternative economy in one Florida town. And a new series tackles the biggest political issues of our time. I'm Megan Lieberman, live from the New York Times newsroom. With last week's political truce behind him, President Obama laid into his opponent's lack of foreign policy experience at the VFW convention yesterday. Governor Romney will respond this afternoon. White House correspondent Peter Baker joins us now from Washington. Hi, Peter.
Hey there.
So, Peter, finally, foreign policy is in the spotlight this week.
Well, that's right. It's a brief interregnum, I think, in between talk of Bain Capital and outsourcing and other economic issues that the candidates want to talk about. But for this week, at least, we're talking about what these candidates would do in the next 4 years as a foreign policy president.
And they're really going after each other in these VFW speeches. But what are the real substantive differences between them on foreign policy?
Well, the interesting thing in elections like this, candidates tend to accentuate the differences and make them out to be, in fact, bigger than they might actually be. You're actually not seeing the kind of differences we've seen in some past elections. The big debate about Iraq in 2004, 2008, that's over. So what you see here is candidates, particularly Governor Romney as a challenger, looking for small areas to really drive a wedge in and to try to present each other as an unfit steward of the country's foreign policy, even if on the broad strokes they're relatively in the same place.
Now, of course, Mitt Romney's also going overseas tomorrow, and these foreign trips are kind of a rite of passage now for presidential candidates. You've seen a lot of them. What are the benefits? What are the pitfalls?
Well, it has become a rite of passage. A good way of putting it. These days you have to check that box and show that you can handle yourself on the world stage. If you can't stand up to Vladimir Putin or make a trip to the Middle East and show that you know how to handle a complex situation, it might sow some doubt in the minds of voters that you're ready for this. And Mitt Romney, as a former governor, of course, has relatively little experience in terms of foreign policy. Just as Senator Obama didn't have all that much when he ran 4 years ago. So this is a way of showing, that as a candidate you have stature and gravitas.
Now, the locations that Mitt Romney has chosen, particularly Israel and Poland, these are not chosen at random, are they? They've got both foreign policy and potentially domestic electoral implications, don't they?
It's completely a coincidence that they're going to have a fundraiser.
That was the first place he thought
in
of.
London, and they're going to go to Poland, which, of course, is a central issue in today's foreign policy arena. Look, Poland obviously is an important place for Romney because one of the few areas where he has drawn a very sharp distinction with President Obama is over policy toward Russia. Poland is one of the Eastern European countries that feels somewhat aggrieved by President Obama's reset policy of trying to be closer with Moscow. So going there is helpful for Romney's argument. Plus, it doesn't hurt that there are quite a number of Polish Americans he might want to have vote for him in the fall.
In swing states, particularly.
In swing states, particularly, exactly. Midwestern states where they make up an important part of the constituency. Israel, of course, another area where there is a difference between the two, where President Obama has been seen as not as supportive of Israel as some Israel supporters would like him to be on issues of settlements in particular. Governor Romney is going to go there and basically try to outflank President Obama in his stated friendship for Israel and make him appeal to the constituency back home, not just Jewish Americans, but also Christian Americans who care a lot about Israel policy and say, I'm a better handler of that policy than the current incumbent.
So, Peter, is this a one-week thing? Are we back to all economy all the time next week?
I think we are back to all economy all the time next week. Again, it's fairly unusual to have foreign policy take such a backseat to domestic issues. But in this day and age, with Osama bin Laden now dead and Al-Qaeda seemingly, receding if not gone, the war in Iraq is over, and people aren't paying much attention to the war in Afghanistan, even if they should. you know, it's become a very inward election, an election where we're focused on our own country. Even President Obama, who thinks he has a pretty good foreign policy record to run on, says, look, America, it's now time to be nation building at home. So he thinks he has an advantage over Governor Romney in his handling of foreign policy, but even he's not going to be talking about it very much because he recognizes that voters are very, very focused today on what's happening in their own communities.
Thanks, Peter. Another issue at the forefront is gun control. After the tragedy in Aurora, Colorado, many gun control advocates renewed their calls for stricter gun laws, but the prospects for new legislation look dim. I talked earlier with Trip Gabriel and asked him why he thinks neither campaign is going to go anywhere near new gun control measures.
It's a function of, you know, this particular presidential election in which both candidates need to appeal to a pro-gun rights constituency, particularly in swing states where the president is very sensitive and vulnerable on some of these issues. There's no constituency in Congress for passing any kind of incremental gun control legislation. There hasn't been for years and years and years. The American public has become increasingly in favor of gun rights and opposed to restricting any sort of access to guns.
There's also an enthusiasm gap here, right? Because gun rights voters care a lot more about this issue than gun control voters do.
That's right. Second Amendment partisans are willing to vote as a single issue. They're willing to donate money on that issue. Advocates and people who feel gun control is important don't rank it nearly as high as a single issue.
Democrats usually have a bigger hill to climb on gun rights than Republicans do, but even Mitt Romney is vulnerable on this, isn't he?
As governor of Massachusetts, he signed an assault weapons ban, and he's been reminded of that certainly during the Republican primaries, and does feel has felt the sting of you know, losing elements of the Republican base, and he needs to have that enthusiasm come November.
So we really have no one out there talking about gun control other than some big city mayors like Michael Bloomberg. Do you see that changing at all?
Well, interestingly, in reporting this piece yesterday, a Republican strategist suggested to me that the only way that you know, gun control advocates might counter the impact and the power of the National Rifle Association were if Mayor Bloomberg, you know, dedicated, let's say, $500 million worth of his personal fortune and created his own grassroots group in which there would be, you know, that sort of you know, individual you know, advocacy and action across the country on this issue.
While foreign policy and gun control are in the news, the race is still expected to hinge on the economy. In Dixie County, Florida, economic necessity has spawned a kind of modern-day trading post where used goods mix with political debate.
All right, Stan, you got the next item in your right hand. Plastic dinnerware.
Yeah. This is Adam Ellick reporting from Dixie County in northwest Florida. It's Saturday night, and the hottest place in tiny Old Town is the Dixieland Auction House.
I think that's because this is the way people are buying now. They're buying used, you know, repossessed things and stuff like that. They can't buy new.
Florida's economy has been hit particularly hard in the recession. As a result, the State Auctioneer Association says the past 3 years have been the best in decades, as people turn to used items and fight for every dollar.
$2, thank you, ma'am.
The auction house owners are Tony Colley, a retired termite inspector, and his wife of 50 years, Glenda.
Because everybody calls me the #1 bitch around here, and I said, well, that's okay. I know I am. They ain't gonna fit you. Not with that big gut you got.
The Obama and Romney teams are combing the state for every possible vote, but 25% of Floridians won't vote, including Tony and Glenda. They stopped voting after the 2000 election, which was decided in Florida. The Colleys may not vote, but most of their customers do, so the couple made an exception to their no politics rule from me. And it didn't take long to hear some strong opinions.
I was always Democrat till Obama got in there. I didn't vote for him. I'm very prejudiced. I don't like black men. So.
Many of the customers here are struggling small business owners.
Oh, we haven't worked in
We're small business
5
owners.
months.
And they're deeply divided on how much time the president deserves to fix the economy.
I
think
still
we
respect him very much.
need more than 8 years.
Yeah, you need more than
It took a long time
It took
coming
many years for it to happen. It's been
to
happening
get
for
here,
a long
but
time.
it's going to take a long time to clean it up.
We did both vote Republican, and we'll do it again.
But other small business owners say their patience for the president has run out.
Our best years of business were in 2006 and 7, and going into 2008, and our worst year has been 2010 and 11.
This week we're kicking off a series which looks at critical issues in the election, whether or not they're being talked about on the campaign trail. Washington Bureau Chief David Leonhardt's been spending a lot of time looking at the scope and scale of the country's economic challenges. Hi, David.
Hi, Megan. How are you?
So you posted the first piece in this agenda series that we're producing yesterday on the Economics blog, and it's about the decline of the middle class. So who is the middle class?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, if you listen to the political debate, you could think it's anyone making all the way up to $250,000. But even in a relatively well-off metro area like Washington or like New York, excuse me, $250,000 is very high on the spectrum, top few percent. So the middle class is really somewhere in the kind of 30, 60, 80 range.
Now, both campaigns talk a lot about how to improve the lot of the middle class, as the president did yesterday in a new ad. So let's take a quick look at that.
I believe the only way to create an economy built to last is to strengthen the middle class, asking the wealthy to pay a little more so we can pay down our debt in a balanced way, so that we can afford to invest in education, manufacturing, and homegrown American energy for good middle-class jobs. Sometimes politics can seem very small, but the choice you face, it couldn't be bigger.
Now, David, Mitt Romney would say that you help the middle class by growing the overall pie and reducing taxes and cutting regulation. Is either the president or Mitt Romney right on this, or are they both missing the scope of the problem?
Well, I mean, I think as we pointed out in the series, any political debate is likely to gloss over some of the complexities. But I do think, you had Peter Baker earlier on the show, and I do think Peter had a piece last week pointing this out. They are setting up a kind of fundamental contradiction here. I mean, a fundamental choice here between the two. Romney really believes that it's the government's job mostly to get out of the way. And Obama really believes that prosperity and a growing middle class and improving lives for the poor depends on both the private sector and a quite active role for government. So that is a real choice there.
But how much can any president really change something like middle class decline? How much of this is about global trends and technological forces that are kind of beyond a president's control?
Well, in the short term, we give presidents way too much credit and way too much blame for the economy. I mean, if you look at the two George Bushes, one of them took office right as a recession was beginning. That wasn't his fault. That's the younger one. And the other one also had a recession started on his watch that really wasn't his fault. But in the longer term, presidents really can have a fundamental impact on the economy. They can affect both the growth rate and they can affect where the distribution of gains go through policies that affect both pre-tax income and also obviously after-tax income.
And so what do some of those kinds of measures be that sort of affect in the longer term?
Well, so it would be something like education policy. I mean, if you talk to economists, one of the things you hear is that one of the reasons for the middle class struggles right now are that our educational attainment has really slowed down. That's something that federal and state and local policy can clearly affect. It would be something like regulatory policy. Some people believe one of the big differences between the two parties is one party believes that we've had way too much regulation, and certainly the liberal part of the Democratic Party believes that part of the reason why the middle class is struggling is we've had too much deregulation. And then the most obvious and direct way would be taxes. The Democrats want to raise taxes on people making more than $250,000 a year. The Republicans do not, and that has a direct effect on the size of government we have and the relative burden of paying for that government among different groups.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Before we go, the agenda series will continue through the fall as we approach Election Day, and new issues will be unveiled each day this week. We want you guys to get involved, so go to the caucus blog and post a comment, email us, or go to Twitter and use the hashtag #TheAgenda. That's all for today. Stay with us online for more on Campaign 2012. I'm Megan Lieberman. Thanks for watching.